fees.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Bay.
Thank you. I have items number 10 and 11, and both of those items are ready.
Thank you. All righty, let's go to Councilor Green.
Thank you, Madam President. So item 12 will be held at the request of the administration. Item 13, I do have some questions on. So I guess the first question I have on this one was, I know one of the things that Center State and the administration have been talking about is potentially locating the New York State Smart City Center in the Tech Garden. So I guess the question here would be, if that were to happen, would the city pay rent? And is that something we should think about before we sign this? I don't know if Kevin's able to answer that, or Jen, or whoever's comfortable, but in terms of that transaction, I guess, would the city pay rent if we were to be a tenant?
Councilor Green, hi, sorry about that. Took me a second to kind of get unmuted there. I don't know the answer to that because in the only time this the Smart City Center was brought up, in any conversation, we were told that the city just wasn't at that point yet in terms of its own planning to know what it would need.
Okay. I mean, because I have the mayor's legislative and funding priorities, and it is one of the things on there, and it specifically mentions having this be located in the expanded tech garden. So it's far enough along for it to be included in a document for the governor. So I guess the question here is, should we include this in this lease now, that if the city wants to take 10, 15,000 square feet of space in the tech garden, that we would get that for free? Is that something Center State's comfortable including in this lease?
Sorry about that. Still trying to find the unmute button on here. It simply hasn't been presented to us yet. So I don't know what, right? I don't know what the parameters are. So I'm not in a position to address that yet. I guess it's a function of, you know, what the needs would be. I don't know. And, you know, it's hard for me to commit to something simply based on, you know, a question that's brought up at this point that it's not had any context around it, at least in any conversations I've been in.
Councilor Green, I can chime in. This is Jen Tiff, Deputy Commissioner at MBD. So yeah, we have, you know, been continuing to, you know, discuss creating a New York Center for Smart Cities. And more recently, in the last probably few months, we've started to really more seriously at placing that center first and foremost in the tech garden. So all of that is true. We're still very much at the early planning stages, I think, of what that center would look like, but really from the perspectives of a lease like this, how much space we would need. So unfortunately, we're still really a few months out from having a good enough estimate to be able to put a number around how much square footage we would need. You know, I think the Center State team, Rob and Ben Sayo and kind of the group we've been in discussions with has been obviously really open to the idea of having the New York Center in the tech garden space, and I think it's a good fit for a lot of reasons. But unfortunately, we're not really at a place just yet to put a number around it in terms of square footage needs, and some of that depends a little bit on you know, we do get some support from the state in terms of technology purchases and that kind of thing, which would go into the center. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of definitive updates on that, but that's kind of where we stand now, at least, just so everyone's kind of aware of the status of the conversation.
Councilor Green, if I could, maybe this is an opportune time to make sure something happened that I certainly was a part of a discussion on. From what I understand, this is not supposed to be a municipally owned operation. And I would much prefer that it not be. When it was initially discussed that this project would exist on MLK and Salina Street, that was the discussion I had with the mayor, that I thought it needed to be privately owned and or operated in some way, and that the government not take up that operation. I believe I had a similar conversation fairly recently, that it wouldn't be municipally owned and operated. So, Councilor Green, maybe to your point, this is an opportune time to make sure that that's the case. And if that is the case, or if it's at least a stated case, we kind of hold the feet to the fire in that respect. We can't afford that kind of operation.
Yeah, I mean, the document I'm looking at specifically says the city's digital command center will be located here. So at the very least, there's a plan to have city employees be working in this facility. Okay, the basic issue I have here is there's a potential under the way this agreement's written for the city to lease this building that we own to Center State for $1, and then Center State to turn around and charge the city rent to use the building that we own. And the question is, should we protect ourselves here to make sure that doesn't happen? So we don't have to resolve that here, but that's just the point I'm trying to raise here. The next thing I just want to talk about, so the length of the term. So I know that was one of the things that was a compromise, I guess, to make it 20 years instead of 30 years. But when you look at the original agreement was 15 years, and then there was 3 5-year extensions that had to be exercised mutually by the council and the mayor for each of those. So the original agreement was that the city could end after 15 years, and this new agreement makes it 5 years longer for 20 years. I didn't know what the rationale was behind extending it.
Councilor Green, now the original agreement was 30 years and then changed to the options that you're talking about, but the first option was exclusively belonging to Center State. And what we said was...
That's not what was in the council agenda, if you look at that.
And
the council has the ability to exercise that.
Well, that was certainly not ever our understanding of it, Councilor Green.
So I guess that brings me to my next point, which is I haven't seen a copy of this lease. I don't know if anyone on the council has, but I mean, I personally wouldn't sign I wouldn't agree to a lease for an apartment for a year without being able to read the lease. I don't personally feel comfortable voting on some $16 million building for 20 years, but that's something I think should be in the book, that we can read the lease so these kind of questions can get answered. And then the other thing is that the paperwork that we do have, so there's a couple different letters in there. One's from Rob Simpson, one's from Budget Director Rudd, one's from Commissioner Clifford, and there's some discrepancies between them. So there's a particular discrepancy about whether or not the revolving loan fund needs to be invested in distressed census tracts. So Budget Director Rudd's letter, as well as the short title in our book, say that they do, that they're exclusively for that. And some of the other letters say that they just need to be anywhere in the city. So that's in our book right now. Those are inconsistent. So I don't know what the intent was of which one's correct, but that's inconsistent in our book right now.
Councilor Green, as it was discussed, the revolving loan fund. I'm sorry?
I wasn't there for the discussion, so that's why I'm trying to.
As it was discussed, the revolving loan fund would be for companies to locate, graduating companies to locate in the city, and there would be enhanced terms for those locating in distressed census tracts.
Okay.
Allow me to clarify, since I was a part of that discussion. And let me call out a few other things that's not being transparent here. One, the stark difference, Councilor Green, is the fact that one is restricted to the city, while there were revolving loans before, they were not specific to the city. And in the past, it was very hard, to be quite frank, to get Center State to commit to something specifically for the city. No offense to Center State. That's certainly one benefit. The added benefit is the concentration of or the increased incentive for people who would develop in distressed census tracts. Let me start, though, with what the conversation or what the debate was originally over. Profit sharing. Now, with all due respect, the very use of the word profit in the same sentence with nonprofit is contradictory, right? Because nonprofits can't make profit. But that was acknowledged at some point that was the wrong terminology. Even in that same respect, the very nature of a 501c6 is that it does not earn profit and it does not distribute shares of dividends. which of course would qualify as gifts of profit. In that same respect, though, revenue sharing would constitute a similar problem, and so that, by law, can't happen. If there was a debate to be had over cost, it should have been had over lease costs on the front end, not on the back end, on collection. And so this is where the debate initially started. Let's be clear, and that's a statement of fact. It's not opinion. It's not politics. It's not anything, right? You know, I manage a nonprofit. I know what the rules are. So if there's a discussion to be had, it should have been or should be had on lease costs, not on let's split revenue at the end and get audited by the IRS. I think we have to be clear about that.
Yeah. So the proposal was that we would take the operating income for the building, subtract out the cost of operating the building, and that the net operating income at the end would be split between Center State and the city. And I've heard that that's illegal, but I've not heard from attorneys. I don't know, Councilor Bay, if you spoke to Corporation Counsel or where that came from, but I haven't heard why.
I run a nonprofit. That's why I know the rules.
Okay, so let's ask Corporation Counsel right now. Can we say definitively that that would be illegal, what we're proposing?
Profit and or revenue sharing, yeah, that's illegal. You can call IRS and ask them that.
Is there anyone on Corporation Counsel that wants to weigh in on that?
Our office, that's Joe Barry, First Assistant. Our office has not made a final determination on that question.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess just my last point, and then I'll cede it, is even if the idea is that there shouldn't be any sharing of net operating income with the city, one thing I think everyone would agree on is there should be some kind of financial reporting so that we know what's being done there. We know that it's being reinvested back in the facility. And we know that when this lease comes up in 20 years, that we know what the financial stake is and we know what the terms are. And this doesn't have any financial reporting, and that's an issue for me as well. So I'll turn it over if any other councilors have questions.
Yeah, Councilor Green, if I may, I have a brief question.
Sure.
So, Mr. Schwab, I'm wondering, as we talked about this last time, any activities that happen at the Tech Garden that are revenue generating that don't directly support new startups or businesses, right, are supposed to come back before the council to ensure that we give their permission. Do you agree with that statement?
Under the current terms, correct.
Okay, right. And so, one of the things that I was asking about was, revenue that might be had from event rentals, such as, from corporate events or weddings in the hotels. And it's my understanding that some things like that were being discussed, although they're not ultimately finalized. Is that also fair to say? That's
correct. At the request of the hotel and frankly some of the neighbors, it is something that they thought would enhance, frankly, the operations of the hotel, which we all want to see succeed. So that's where the idea came from. Certainly, it was also seen internally as a benefit for Tech Garden companies, as space that would be available for them to use. As you may or may not be aware, we compete for a lot of the most promising startups. And certainly, while we feel like we've made the most out of a collapsed parking garage, we certainly recognize that there are cities competing with us that have developed facilities with far greater amenities for young tech startups in an effort to get them to stay there, to grow, and to build their own tech community.
Right. So yes, I get that. And so it enhances, your offerings, but would you agree that such rentals would not directly support those activities?
It would really depend, to be blunt. If the money goes, no, let's be blunt. If the money goes into supporting these startups, and if that same facility use helps to attract these startups, right? I mean, we have programming here that Councilor Green, who looked incredulous when I just said that, does acknowledge has to be subsidized by other parts of this operation on an annual basis. There has not been 1 year where it's come close to break even.
Well, I mean, we're not
It's subsidized
we're not talking about overall support here. We're talking about one specific portion of this business. So would you say that such rental activities, again, directly support the startups of a new business as would be required underneath this current ordinance as it's written?
If that money is funneled into programming, absolutely.
Okay. And how would the council be aware that that's actually what's happening?
It's what we have done since we started running the Tech Garden.
Okay. But how underneath this lease how would we be able to determine specifically that any revenue generated from these events are directly supporting the startups or new businesses?
Again, we do, right now, any number of different things that support our companies at the Tech Garden. Right? I mean, and whether it's the amenities that we put in there, the reality is the programming that we pull in, the grants that we pull in, either from state or from private sources, foundations, subsidized by Center State CEO members. The reality is all of that goes in to support the operations of the Tech Garden.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone from Manlius has a rooftop wedding to Tech Garden, they pay $15,000. You're saying that's central to the mission of Tech Garden?
No, what I'm saying is the operations of the building are central to the mission of the Tech Garden. If everything is flowing into that, right? So if you whatever the case, you hold an event there, it is for the benefit of the Tech Garden.
So under your interpretation of the lease, does it need to be amended if you were to do an event venue, or is the way we wrote it right now allow you to do that without going back to the city?
I would absolutely defer to people with more expertise in that than I have. No, I mean, Councilor White, again, I wasn't meaning to be funny, right? I'm not going to try to offer some sort of a legal opinion that I don't have the expertise to offer.
Don't you want us to vote on this today and you don't know the answer to that question? Does anyone know the answer to that question?
What I know, and let me be clear, I made this clear to all parties involved. I'm not lobbying for or against the project. What I will do is state the facts. I understand the logic of their questioning because their point is the lease is specific to a certain type of performance, and the ancillary performances with revenue, they're arguing should be shared. So I get the argument. I don't know that the process of this should be held up on that argument, but even still, I get the argument, and so that's what they're asking. I don't think it's impractical, but if they're saying, if the operation is to stick to the lease's intent and stick to the lease's intent, then the argument is valid that there's no additional revenue. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I'm hearing you right. So, I think the thing is, how long do we plan to deliberate? Do we want to give the counselors a justified or a respectable answer with all in all fairness, to justify their concerns? Does it require additional language, or are we just going to stick to what the lease says and move forward? I think that's essentially the point that needs to be clarified here.
Well, and thank you, Councilor Bay, because in a lot of ways that is my point. And what I'm interested in finding out is, if we're supposed to be the gatekeepers of the well-being of the city, right? We're not saying that the Tech Garden does not provide a valuable service, but should they be allowed a windfall on the city's back, right? And I think that that's why I'm so focused on whether or not these activities would directly support the startups. And I think that in order to make an informed decision on whether or not we need additional language, that question needs to be answered.
With all due respect, Councilor White, I don't think there's any scenario where you're discussing could produce a windfall. I mean, it was an interesting choice of words. You could look at any events venue in downtown Syracuse, for example, or anywhere in the city. Trust me, we do not want to be in the events business. Okay, it is not going to produce a windfall. It is, it's just not possible. We're not San Diego with 340 days of sunshine a year. So I don't think there's any scenario where what you're describing could produce a windfall. I don't think there's any scenario where somebody would pay the the types of money to use a space like that that could ever come close to that. So, you know, with all due respect, you know, it's not consistent with what we see. If what you all are saying is you simply don't want to see that space, or you don't want to see it used beyond the Tech Garden members, you know, that's something that we hear loud and clear.
What I'm talking about is whether or not you're going to be engaging in any revenue generating activities that do not directly support startups and new businesses. I keep reading from the ordinance because that's exactly what we're talking about. We're not talking about Center State's main mission. I think everybody agrees with that. We're talking about activities that fall outside of that. And I wish that we could focus in and drill in on that aspect.
Well, Councilor White, if what you're saying is you don't want to see events on the roof, and we're talking about a space, by the way, very clearly, right, that we do not yet know whether it can even be incorporated into the building, right? It was in the renderings because it was asked for. We don't know whether we will have the budget for it. We don't know if it will make any operational sense, right? I mean, so let's be really clear. We're talking about a hypothetical space. Because the final design is certainly not done. That process hasn't begun. And, you know, it's interesting because we seem to be caught on something that may or may not be in the building, and it was only being considered at the request of, frankly, what we saw is, you know, an important neighbor in downtown. So to be blunt, we don't know whether what we're talking about is even going to exist.
If I could offer something else for consideration, not necessarily an argument, but just a thought. And I mentioned that, you know, I run a nonprofit currently. You know, any program that we do that's not related to our general operation is still done by us and is therefore still regulated by the IRS. We can't take the funds and give away to another organization, just using this as an example. And while we can reinvest funds in other areas or other ways, it still has to go back toward the operation as a rule, and we make a report annually to that effect. Any impropriety in that report, any material issues in that report will result in the audit of the organization. That's the rules. You know, I understand that there was a question to Corporation Counsel, but no disrespect to Corporation Counsel. That's IRS rules, and they don't trump IRS. You know, and so I think it's a fair argument that's being made in terms of, you know, things that don't appear to be in the purview of the operation. But I think there's a point to be made, and of course, you know, counselors, you can consider as much. You know, there's a point to be made that because of the organization putting on whatever the festivity is in the name of the organization, it is still regulated by IRS rules. Now, somebody can tell me if I'm wrong. I know that's our rules. I don't know that they change depending on the nonprofit you talk to.
You're not wrong, Counselor. I operated the Southwest Community Center for 4 years. It's a city-owned asset. We would lease space in the building for baby showers, whatever the case may be. That revenue would be turned back around into the maintenance, not even the operation, the continued maintenance of the building to make repairs that we never had enough grant money to pay for.
Likewise, to build a little bit on that, Sharon, I ran the Spanish Action League for 13 years, and we ran a very successful interpreters program from which all the income that was unrestricted went back into the operation because it's the law to do that. So just wanted to add that.
This is consistent with every program that we've operated at the Tech Garden. We have no choice but to put it back into the mission and the operation.
Mr. Schwab, beside I have a question, Councilor Green. I'm sorry to just
Go ahead,
beside the recent negotiated incentive to the city resident, which is $250,000 loan. Are there any other incentive specifically dedicated to the city residents?
Not in terms of funding programs. There are programs to encourage and stand up capabilities for whether it be coding skills or other sort of job related skills. There are also entrepreneurial boot camps that are all targeting the city. So efforts to get either people into tech fields or to help them start businesses. In terms of our funding, so, I believe Councilor Green, for example, referred to the funds of funds at one point. That goes directly into the programs, most of which are state funded, I believe all of which, whether that be the Clean Tech Center, which has a state requirement, Grants for Growth, which has a regional requirement. So we're not able to go sort of beyond what that funding was purposed for at the outset. That is part of why what we're standing up now as a part of this agreement will be unique because it will be only for businesses that are graduating from the Tech Garden and locating in the city of Syracuse, and with additional benefits, favorable terms for those who would look to locate in distressed census tracts.
Any other questions from councilors?
Just real
This
quick,
is
Kevin.
Joe Barry, First Assistant. I just wanted to follow up on Councilor White's reference to the language in the ordinance, which does reflect the current request letter. The provision does indicate that the premises have to be used exclusively for supporting the startups and the new business services, and that an amendment will be needed to add any service that would be beyond that. So in my opinion, if the rooftop business was to materialize, Center State under this current language would have to seek an amendment from the council.
Councilor Green, it seems to me that backing up what Joe just said, and of course what the deputy mayor just said, and Councilor Bay, is that, and Kevin, your contention is anything you do there basically is going to be pumped back into that and for the support of the new business incubation services, correct?
That is correct.
So if you have like you bring back Party in the Plaza and you have it on the roof with, of course, adequate fencing, I imagine, all that money from that would be pumped back into the support the incubation services, correct?
We first of all, we do not envision Party on the Plaza. I think you're the first person.
I'm an old event guy. What else am I going to say?
I believe that's the first time I've heard anybody bring that idea up. Yes, anything we would do would have to go back into funding the mission of the Tech Garden. It would have to support the work of the Tech Garden.
So hearing that, I got to say that with the new revisions to the lease and the promise of the $250,000 that would go to our business corridors and some of our distressed social census tracts in support of new businesses, it seems like this could be, I would be supportive of this then with that understanding. So that's all I wanted to say, Councilor Green. Thank you.
I had a quick.
So, and then we'll cut it after Councilor.
Kevin, you mentioned more favorable terms for the distressed census tracts. What would be more favorable about the terms should they choose a distressed census tract?
Well, that hasn't been defined yet. We'd be happy to work with the council on that, but I would envision either potentially a lower interest rate or longer terms, but certainly that kind of thing.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll move on. I mean, and I guess I would just say broadly, I mean, I do understand I have a philosophical difference than a lot of my colleagues on how to treat this and how to move forward. So I mean, I'm going to hold it today, but if someone wants to object and take ownership of this legislation moving forward, I understand that, because I think about this differently than everyone else, and I acknowledge that. So I'm planning on holding this one. And then item 14 is ready, and those are my items. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilor Paniagua.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have items 15 and 16. Item 15 is ready. It's the authorizing the 2020 contract with CPI HR. And then item 16, it's we're going to hold due to regular local law protocol, which is the easement on Henniger High School for Niagara Falls.
Councilor Paniagua, technically you
Yes.
have to introduce item 16 at 1 o'clock and table it. It can't really.
Oh, okay, then, okay, I will do that then. Thank you, all right. So, they're ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Kearney.
Thank you, Madam President. I have items 17 through 27. 17 and 18 are going to be held. 19 through 27 are all ready. And those are my items.
All righty, thank you. Counselor Hogan.
Thank you, President Hudson. I have item 28 and it is ready.
Thank you. Counselor Majoke.
Thank you, Madam President. I have item 29 through 31. All my items are ready, Madam President, unless if anyone has questions.
Thank you. Counselor Allen.
Thank you, Madam President. I have items 32 and 33. 32 was for a training series for the Syracuse Landmark Preservation Board, and 33 was an amendment to correct the language on this item, and both of these items are ready. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Need a second. All in favor?
Aye.
See you at 1 o'clock. Thank you.